All right, welcome to the first of what is probably going to be many of these. So I'm going to use these to introduce basically the standards and some of the key terms and vocabulary and some of the key elements of what we're talking about today. So these first two slides are always going to be just the standards of what we're doing. I'm going to kind of run through them quickly because you can always pause it and write down the key terms that I have on the slide afterwards after. Okay. So what we're going to be talking about today is standards 1.1 and 1.2. Standard 1.1 is introduction to maps. So we are going to be talking about the types of maps and basically how to identify patterns on maps. So we are going to introduce our first model to do that. And we're going to talk throughout this next week about the different types of maps, as well as how maps convey information and distortions that maps might have. So we won't talk about all of that today, but we'll cover that over the course of the next week. And the second is talking about the depiction of relationships of time, space, and scale on maps, and what geographers actually do. What is the process of geography? So increasingly, that has grown to use things like GIS systems, satellites, remote sensing, and all sorts of technology. That's pretty nifty, and you'll see in a video that we watch at the end of the day. Okay. So some of the key terms that we are going to talk about over the course of the next week, but specifically today, are patterns, reference maps, thematic maps, absolute distance, absolute location, map projections, and distortions. And then for 1.2, GIS, so geographic information systems, and the process of remote sensing. So the ones that we're going to key in on today are basically going to be on the last bullet point that you see here. How are differences in patterns and relationships portrayed on different types of maps? So to do that, we are going to talk about 5 key terms. And then I'm going to get you started on the first kind of bell ringer activity that you're going to do at the beginning of class. Okay. So what I would do as I'm talking about terms is in your notebook, go ahead and make sure that anytime there's a slide dedicated to a term, you at least write that term down. In terms of definitions, what you want to do, whether you do note cards or in your notebook, is sort of up to you, but I would have a process by which you do vocabulary, and I'll talk a lot more about that in class. So the first terms we're going to talk about are called absolute versus relative distance. So we're going to start with some easy ones. Let's see. All right, we're going to start with some easy ones. And the first one is absolute distance. So absolute distance is a physical unit of measure, for instance, between the number of miles between downtown Seattle and downtown Tacoma. So absolute distance refers to the exact distance between two locations. So you could probably synthesize the definition as exact location between, or exact distance between two locations. And the other term, absolute distance, is a little bit more esoteric. It is the measure of the social, cultural, and economic relatedness or connectivity between two places. So not necessarily the geographic distance as much as the connection between the two places. So that term is called relative distance. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we get to the next slide. Okay. The next slide is distance decay. So this goes with the last two types of distance that we talked about in the last slide. And this is really kind of the first model that we talk about in this class. So whenever we talk about a model, they're always in some ways theoretical, and you'll be able to find plenty of ways in which they apply, but plenty of ways in which they don't apply in the real world. And distance decay is kind of the first example of that. So the official definition of distance decay, the term distance decay, is that, the diminished importance and eventual disappearance of a phenomenon with increased distance from its origin. So basically, that's a complicated way of saying that if you have two locations or two places, the farther away the locations are, the less assumed interaction they will have. So interaction, we're going to talk about distance decay in a couple different contexts, but mainly we talk about it in the context of culture How much cultural interaction do two places have in terms of the spread of language, the spread of religion, the spread of other elements of culture? And really, the second big one that we talk about distance decay is migration. So how much actual migration between two places exists? And this model says that if two places are farther away, then they are assumed to have less interaction. And we will come up with plenty of examples in which that is true, but also some examples where that's not true. And there's going to be kind of an opposite term called time-space convergence, which you don't need to know right now, but basically says that with all of the increased levels of elements of globalization like travel and the internet and other forms of global media, this is becoming less and less true. And you can come up with plenty of examples of that. All right, so we have learned about absolute distance, relative distance, and distance decay. So that tells us a little bit about how we think about kind of the relationship between two places or two distances. So there's two more terms we're going to learn about. And I think these are pretty self-explanatory, but I want to kind of start in terms of how we talk about patterns on maps. So you'll see on the left hand, we have kind of a clustered version of dots. And on the right, we have what we would call dispersal. So dispersal is the action or process of distributing things over a wide area. So again, you probably don't have to write these down if you know what the words clustered and dispersed means, because it is exactly what you think it means. But this is going to come into play as we talk about kind of patterns that you see on maps today. All right, so hopefully that wasn't too much or too long. And that is sort of the end of the notes for today. So we're going to shift to kind of what you're going to do to start off class with today. So first of all, kind of make sure that you have some form of notes on absolute and relative distance, distance decay, clustering, dispersal, as much as you think you need, but probably at least something on absolute and relative distance and distance decay. And then the next thing I want you to do is write down level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 in your notebook, and leave yourself some space to write after each. And then on the back end of this, you're going to need your whiteboard and your marker that you got in your materials. So level 1, leave yourself some space. Level 2, leave yourself some space, and so on. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to do is I'm going to introduce basically what we're going to do kind of once or twice a week. This is going to be one of the kind of processes of geographic analysis that we do. So it is called a 4-level analysis. And basically, we're going to use it when we look at maps. Maybe some other diagrams, but mostly maps. So level 1, what you're going to write on level 1 is what you see on a map. So what is the map of? What is the map intended to show? Where is the map of? So that we talk about scale a little bit. And when is the map from? So this is the map we're going to be doing today. And you would say Earth at night, global scale, and you can see tiny, tiny, tiny down here at the bottom right-hand corner, it says 2000. So it's from the year 2000, which is a long time ago. So that's basically what you write on the first level, is the what, the where, the when, and basically the scale too, which we'll get to later on in this week. The next level is patterns. So what specific patterns do you see on the map? So when we look at maps, they are going to be used to convey data, and those data are telling us things. So what are things that this map is telling you? What are patterns that you see? And you don't necessarily have to be right on this. You just have to make attempts to identify patterns. So that's one of the good things about this, is it can be used as a process of kind of inquiry about what you're looking at. So level 3, why there? And then how did it get there? So think about level 2 and the pattern you identified. And level 3 is basically, why is that pattern there? What are the bigger forces that are making that pattern exist to you, or making that pattern shown to you? Then level 4 is, what is a prediction that you would have about this map? So this map is, like we said before, made from the year 2000. And you can probably talk about where there may or may not be more dots. And then some of the cultural, political, social, economic reasons behind that. So that'll be kind of at the heart of what we're doing this year. So I always try to introduce this real early. All right. So, like we said, you are going to start by conducting a 4-level analysis. Level 1, Earth at night, year 2000 on the global scale, showing off the entire Earth. Level 2, I want you to try to identify some patterns that you see. Level 3, why is it there and how did it get there? And level 4, what are predictions that you might have? So basically, I want you to pause the video when you get to the map and then do this, okay? And then we are going to meet back together, and I want you to have one of your patterns written down on your whiteboard as well. So we'll try that and see how it works. And there'll be some trial and error with all of this, of course. All right, so this is the map that you're analyzing. It is the distribution of basically dots or lights around the kind of across the Earth. So it gives you a pretty good sense of kind of a lot of different things. So I'm not going to get too into it, but I want you to write down patterns that you notice. It can be patterns across the entire world, but also it can be patterns within a single geographic area, within the United States or North America. So write down patterns that you see, okay? And then write down why do those patterns exist, and then write down what are some predictions that you might have for the future. All right, that's it. Great.